The biggest learning for me is just the value of traveling around the state. I have made it a priority in this first year to go to as many regions as possible, visit with as many of our member businesses as possible, because I think that we are the statewide business advocacy organization and we need to hear from those businesses and connect with them and engage with them and be present in the communities throughout the state.
Welcome to Off the Record, a podcast featuring leaders on IBJ Media's Indiana 250 list. I'm Nate Feltman, CEO of IBJ Media, which publishes the Indiana 250, a list of the most influential business people in the state. Today, I'm joined by Vanessa Green Sinders, President and CEO of the Indiana Chamber of Commerce. Vanessa succeeded longtime Indiana Chamber CEO Kevin Brinegar in January of this year, becoming the first woman to lead the state's largest business advocacy group. A native of Massachusetts, Vanessa had only lived in Indiana for a year when she was chosen last October to lead the chamber, but she arrived with an impressive resume, having spent 20 years in public affairs and executive leadership roles in Washington, D.C. In 2022, Vanessa moved her family to Indiana, and Vanessa started a public affairs consulting firm to share the professional expertise she acquired in a career that started when she graduated in 2002 with a degree in government economics from Dartmouth. Vanessa's held high-ranking positions for U.S. senators representing New Hampshire and Massachusetts, was chief of staff for the Campaign to Fix the Debt, a bipartisan effort to rein in government spending, and a top executive for the American Hotel and Lodging Association. Immediately before moving to Indiana, she spent almost 5 years directing policy and political engagement with the White House and Congress for Fortune 100 company Charter Communications Spectrum. After a year doing consulting and settling in with her husband and two sons in Indianapolis's Meridian Kessler neighborhood, Vanessa was chosen to lead the state chamber, which had just unveiled its strategic plans. Indiana Prosperity 2035, a vision for economic acceleration. It's now Vanessa's job to execute the plan and engage the Chamber's 25,000 members statewide, a role that fits her passion for serving the community and creating opportunity. Here's our conversation. Vanessa, welcome to the Indiana 250 podcast.
Thanks, Nate. Excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you here, and I'm looking forward to hearing how you've approached your role at the Chamber. But before we get into the Chamber and all you're doing there, let's talk a little bit about your journey that led you to moving to Indiana. So you were 20 years in D.C. They call it the swamp. 20 years. How did you survive the swamp and over that 2-decade period?
I love DC. I had a great experience over those 20 years. And look, my interest in government and politics started at a young age. I remember doing a school report on Pat Schroeder, who was a congresswoman from Colorado, who was a trailblazer in many respects. And I remember thinking like, geez, I want to be a part of that. That sounds really cool to contribute to your community, make a difference, and be part of something bigger than yourself. So I brought that mentality to DC. And I think throughout those 20 years, I always looked for the positive, tried to work hard, find opportunities to collaborate. And I think that there's government and what happens in DC is really important to our country. And there need to be good people there who are working on it. And I wanted to be one of them.
And you had a pretty high level and interesting job serving as chief of staff to Senator Brown. Do I have it right that he succeeded Ted Kennedy in Massachusetts? That had to be an interesting time on the Hill to be following such a legendary senator and have a new senator you're working with. Tell us a little bit about what that experience was like.
So it was an amazing experience. And look, I grew up in Massachusetts, so to be able to work for my home state senator was pretty awesome. And that was at such a pivotal time when Senator Brown came into office, where the Senate was very tight margins and equally divided. And he was an important vote and was one of the quote unquote moderates who would say very publicly, I want to put America first, put our nation first, and let's work together and solve problems. And so it was really cool to be a part of that. And he was a very high profile member, I think, because a lot of people, they were like, how did a Republican win in Massachusetts? And so there was a lot of attention on us. But I think that experience also taught me that you just got to do your job, that the sun will rise tomorrow, and keep your head down and keep moving forward. And so that's what we did.
And then you served as Vice President for Government Affairs for Charter Communications Spectrum, and also Senior VP for Government Affairs at the American Hotel and Lodging Association. How do you think those two opportunities prepared you for the kind of the role that you have today? I'm sure there were some different leadership skills you acquired in those two organizations.
Working for the hotel industry gave me a real glimpse into businesses of all sizes and different parts of the hospitality industry that really touch all parts of our economy. So I think bringing that depth and breadth of experience of size and type of company is really helpful for me here. And, working for Charter Spectrum, a Fortune 100 cable and broadband company that is highly regulated, doing a lot of things in lots of states. Again, that was another experience that I think helps me think about what do we need to be doing here to keep business moving forward, to keep economic progress, to keep the prosperity that we have in Indiana. And for me, I have always been very focused on partnerships and collaboration, finding opportunities to work together and listening to feedback that you get. And I did that and learned that at all of those organizations and bring that to Indiana.
And then you had an experience working with an organization called Campaign to Fix the Debt, which to me seems even more relevant today with our spiraling national debt. We were talking earlier about Mitch Daniels just penned a column in the Washington Post, and he's been a tireless campaigner on this topic of how important it is we get our house in order nationally. And he's talking about now, how do we deal with the calamity that we know eventually is going to hit and being prepared for that calamity. But you were working for an organization that was directly working to address our national debt. Tell us how that experience was, and do you feel like you made any progress?
Yes, I know. It's a good question. So look, my experience on fiscal issues actually started before that. The first senator that I worked for, Senator Judd Gregg, when I started working for him, he took over as chair of the Senate Budget Committee. So it was his responsibility and our responsibility to really think about the impact that the Senate's policies were having on the nation's debt and fiscal situation. And I even spent a couple of years working for him on his budget committee staff. And even back then, he was one of the few members that was actually really focused on kind of the importance of fiscal issues. But I learned a lot from him. And I think that I took that experience to Campaign to Fix the Debt, which was really a collaboration of stakeholders and companies who feel like if we don't get a handle on our nation's debt and fiscal policies, we're not going to be able to continue growing our country economically. And back in 2012, when I was there, 2013, there was a thought that maybe we could do a quote unquote grand bargain of some entitlement reform and tax reform to put us on a better fiscal path. And unfortunately, that did not happen, but that organization still exists to this day. And I think that to the point that Mitch Daniels just wrote about in his column, like we need to continue to think about that because at a certain point, it's going to become unsustainable and untenable.
We're fortunate here in Indiana to not be dealing with those issues on a state level basis. But of course, if that calamity comes and when it comes, it'll affect all of us. So, but I want to turn to some maybe more positive ideas and really talking more about what you're doing today. But first, your decision to move to Indiana and move your family into Indiana. How did that decision come about? Because you didn't move here for the chamber job.
No.
You came here before you had that job. So tell us about that decision.
As I like to say, moving home, as my husband and I like to call it, has been, I think, the best decision for our family. And we have been so excited to be back here. And we spent 20 years in DC. We have 2 little boys. And I think after 20 years, we were just ready for a change. And Indiana checks all the boxes. It has a great quality of life, a great place to raise a family. And for someone who is an adopted Hoosier who has had experience, on the East Coast and in other places, I think that there is so much economic opportunity, development, innovation, investment going on in the state that more people need to know about. And it was a real easy decision for us to move home, as we like to call it, and haven't been disappointed. And I would say that the opportunity to lead the state's largest business advocacy organization, to be part of helping move Indiana forward, is such a humbling and awesome opportunity, getting to work with business leaders across the state.
I think I read, maybe in preparing to talk to you today, that one of the reasons you might have moved is to have a little more work-life balance. I was going to ask you, how's that working out for you?
Yes, I know. Yeah. I also say often publicly that my youngest child now is 7. And when we moved from DC to Indianapolis, I told him, Sam, this move is so that mom is not going to run around like a crazy lady with work all the time. And yes, I have taken this job at the chamber, but I also have been really doing it my way and making sure that I still pick up Sam from school some days, not every day, but some days. And so it's worked out well. And it is just such a amazing opportunity to give back to our community, be part of something bigger than myself. And I think that that's also important to talk about with your kids, right? And so it's been great.
Good. And you've decided to live in the city versus the suburbs. How did you all make that decision?
Yes. So in DC, we lived on Capitol Hill, about a mile from the Capitol, and we're used to living in the city and being able to walk places and do things. And so for us, just the natural choice was to live in Indianapolis. And maybe that goes back to how I make it all work, but being kind of close to the capital city and then being able to see my kids and do the job and get around the state, it just made sense for us.
Have there been any big surprises since you moved here in terms of, you hadn't lived in Indiana, you visited because your husband's from Indiana, right? But anything that kind of surprised you after you kind of settled in about the state?
I remember when we first moved that I just couldn't believe how nice everyone was, how helpful everyone was when we moved into our neighborhood. So personally, as we were getting situated with schools and then the community, and then professionally with this job, how supportive and invested and excited people are to connect me and help me kind of navigate some of this. And maybe that's coming from growing up on the East Coast where that, there is something to be said for that Midwest Hoosier hospitality and kind of welcome feeling. And I have felt it through and through.
That's great. So I understand you've been traveling the state, getting to know your members and understanding what they have on their minds. Are any significant learnings as you have done those travels around the state?
The biggest learning for me is just the value of traveling around the state. I have made it a priority in this first year to go to as many regions as possible, visit with as many of our member businesses as possible, because I think that we are the statewide business advocacy organization and we need to hear from those businesses and connect with them and engage with them and be present in the communities throughout the state. And it has been so energizing to be in those places and to have people say, thank you for being here. Thank you for getting our listening to our feedback. And so for me, it's just been validating, maybe not surprising. And I am constantly learning about some great new thing that a certain region or business or community is working on, which just helps us do our job better.
Am I correct that the Chamber has the Indiana Prosperity 2035 plan? Am I right that had that already been adopted by the board when you arrived? And so now you look at that plan and you say, I've got to implement the plan, and tell us maybe a couple highlights from that plan and what the focus might be.
As you mentioned, last August, so right before I started, we released our Indiana Prosperity 2035 plan, and it is, in essence, the Chamber's economic vision plan for the state. What do we need to do over the next 10 years to keep economic growth and prosperity going? And it has 6 pillars: workforce, education, innovation and entrepreneurship, infrastructure and energy, quality of place, and health and wellness, healthy wellness communities. Yeah, tick them off. I say it all the time. And then within that, there's a whole bunch of goals and metrics, because if you don't have specific goals and metrics, how are you going to measure kind of where you're going? And as you say, I think that our job now is, I like to say, how do you take those words off the page and make it a reality? And I think for me, recognizing that we are going to do that in collaboration and partnership in coalitions. And the world's evolving every single day. So maybe the words that we wrote last August, maybe some of those words are going to evolve because the world's evolving and Indiana's evolving. So being flexible enough. So I think it's a great opportunity to have that document and those guiding principles, but then be able to implement it and be flexible enough to continue evolving it. And I think it's a real opportunity. I've kind of termed my travels around the state as my Partners in Prosperity tour, because I think it's all of us working together, and we might lead on some parts of it as the chamber, that plan, but then other organizations are going to lead on other parts. But how can the chamber play a convening role and a coordinating role to help make that happen?
You touched on a lot of important topics and that are included in the plan. One of the couple of topics we hear, and the chamber's been part of our Engage Indiana series this year, but we continue to hear at those regional forums about the lack of affordable childcare. We hear about the lack of affordable and really all types of housing at all different levels. Are you hearing that too? Is that part of the plan, or either of those issues incorporated into the plan?
Yes, I would echo both of those comments. And to us, I mean, education is a pillar of the plan, as well as quality of place. And so I would say those topics fit right into both of those pillars. And for us, on childcare, I think it's obviously about supply and affordability. And the legislature was able to take some steps to kind of address the rulemaking process for getting new childcare centers online and create some microsites, and how do we make childcare more affordable for childcare workers, right? So they can come to work this past year, and we were super excited to support those efforts. But my sense is that's going to be something we continue to work on in partnership with the legislature and others. And we hear a lot about that from businesses who that's a problem for their workers, which means their workers might not be able to come to work. And so we got to figure it out. And similarly on housing, how do we think of creative solutions to address that supply and affordability and all of this economic development that is happening in the state, which is amazing. I mean, that $38 billion number that IEDC came out with yesterday for committed capital by the third quarter. But we need to make sure we have the infrastructure to sustain all of that. And that's a real opportunity for us to work together on.
You mentioned collaboration, and everybody I talk to that has gotten to know you, they all say that you're such a good collaborator. And that's a great leadership skill, to collaborate and to be someone that can work with lots of people and for common aims. But maybe just switching gears for a minute, talk a little bit about your leadership style and how you lead your organization today.
My philosophy is of servant leadership and always wanting to think about the team and how am I empowering people, and recognizing that I don't know everything, and that's why you have a team. And when the team works together, that's how you're successful. And I think that stems from what in all the jobs that I had in DC and all of the positions, I was often a young leader or manager who was working with very accomplished senior team members. And I always took that to heart and recognized that was a real positive and opportunity. And I was confident in my role, but I also knew that we would never be successful if we weren't all working together. And I was respecting all of that experience and all of our team members.
Let's take a quick break. This is Off the Record Podcast.
Get caught up on the state's top business news every business day with the Inside Indiana Business Radio On Demand podcast. Available now at InsideIndianaBusiness.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Off the Record Podcast. I'm Nate Feltman, CEO of IBJ Media, and I'm talking with Vanessa Green Sinders, President and CEO of the Indiana Chamber of Commerce. I know you must be a big believer in continuing education. I mentioned you graduated from Dartmouth, but then not too many years ago, you did some type of, it was a certificate or further education at Michigan State in the area of, was it diversity, equity, inclusion? Or tell me a little bit about that continuing education.
Yes. So look, I feel like in my career, I have, as you kind of sensed, went from industry to industry or opportunity to opportunity and haven't just stayed in one place. And I believe in a diversity of experiences and challenging yourself. And that's what makes you better. And that's how you learn. And so I have tried to take advantage of opportunities. I had 2 opportunities while at Charter doing a Stanford women's leadership program, kind of immersive session. And then also that experience at Michigan State where, again, around diversity and inclusion, but just trying to make sure that I'm always learning and getting new ways of thinking and leading and challenging myself to be better to help support whatever organization I'm a part of.
So you're the first woman to lead the chamber, which is pretty awesome. I think the chamber's been around nearly a century. Is that
over 100 years?
How many years has this?
We celebrated our 100-year anniversary in 2022. So I guess 102.
So we're just over 100 years, and but the first woman. That's pretty cool. That's a distinct honor and a neat thing to see that we're seeing women in lots of leadership positions today. Can name them all, but we know a lot of women leaders who are doing great things in our community, for sure, in our state. What does it mean to you to be selected as the first woman? And I'm just curious on that. Then I'll have a follow up to that.
I am humbled and just so grateful for the opportunity. And I continue to think about how I can pay it forward because I think back on my career and I have been extremely blessed to have had several significant women leaders who were my mentors and bosses in various positions who gave me that opportunity and pulled up a chair at the table for me. And also in many cases were working moms and who showed me that you can be a leader and you can be a mom and make it all happen. Sometimes not perfectly, but such is life. So I hope that in this position, I can pay it forward to the next generation of leaders and be supportive.
You referenced you had good mentors. Any specific mentors that you want to mention or that come to mind, that people who, women maybe, who inspired you to have the career that you've had and take on a position like this?
I would start with, they were not in my professional life, but I would mention my parents who at a young age instilled this love of learning and go out and try new things and don't be afraid. And if you don't do it right the first time, get back up and try something else. And they were always pushing me to experience new things and be confident in myself. And I think about that every day. And so feel very blessed about that. And I don't think I'm going to name one woman leader because honestly, I can think of every professional experience from my first job. Before I went to DC, I had that brief stint in Chicago working for Jones Lang LaSalle. And I had a great woman partner there who was awesome to work for. And then in every job I have had some real strong female leaders who have helped me. And I can't say enough about mentorship, whether that's formal or informal.
Well, it's awesome to see changes like that happening in our society, and you're leading them. So thank you. Speaking of partnerships again, collaboration of partnerships, I think you've had a couple of them recently with the Indiana Chamber and some other organizations. One of them is on the women's front, right? You had a partnership with Indiana Sports Corp, and I think it was the Chamber's first Indiana Women's Summit. Is that correct? Tell me a little bit about that summit and what the goals were and what it was like.
the state chamber had never done a women's summit, and there was interest in our membership to do something like that. But I think we also wanted to make sure that it was grounded in Indiana economy, business, make sure it was as useful and future leaning as possible. And I happened to be having a conversation with Patrick Talty, the head of the Indiana Sports Corp, and he was talking about the Sports Corp's new strategic plan. And one of the pillars was women in sports and how to kind of make that really lean into that for Indiana from an economic standpoint, right? As the Sports Corp works on those issues. And I thought to myself, we should do a conference together and make kind of how women in sports, how is that an economic engine for Indiana, since sports is so important and kind of integral to our economy. And then we have this new kind of women in sports push and enthusiasm for many reasons, including the fever, probably. How can we bring that all together? And then on top of that, sports and health is an economic engine for the state and for women, but it's also an individual engine. And how can we kind of support that healthy living and healthy lifestyles for women? Because that's going to make them stronger leaders and better professionals and more able to be part of their communities. And so it was really great to see those two things come together and provide some hopefully unique programming to Hoosier women.
Did you have a high participation rate?
We did. We surpassed the amount of people that we wanted to have there. I think we had like 250.
And then a wellness summit is something that you've had, as well as AI leadership summit, right?
Yes.
And are both of those relatively new to the chamber?
Yes. And look, I would say that all of these things, we want all of our activities to be grounded in Indiana Prosperity 2035. Go back to those 6 pillars of what does the state need to be doing to keep moving forward. And so the AI Summit, that was first ever. We did it in conjunction with Rally, where we wanted to bring together thought leaders to talk about how is AI impacting some key industries in the state. And we're working with CICP and Deloitte on a report that's going to kind of summarize and give some recommendations on what businesses need to think about, maybe what policymakers need to think about. So again, AI is so transformative for the economy. I don't even think we know all the things that it's going to do. And we as the state chamber want to provide some of that thought leadership and make sure that we're helping move that conversation forward. And the Wellness Summit, wellness is key. It goes back to business and workforce. How are we making sure that our workforce is healthy so that our communities can be healthy? And so this is not the first year for the Wellness Summit, but it is a newer thing. And we do it in partnership with our affiliate organization, the Wellness Council of Indiana, again, trying to address an important topic for the state.
So, Vanessa, the Indiana Chamber of Commerce had one leader for 20 years, 2 decades, and you've been there about a year. How do you think about how to put your imprint on the chamber? Are there any big ideas or shakeups that we should expect to see?
I would start, as we mentioned earlier in the podcast, the state chamber has been around for over 100 years and I think has been extremely instrumental and part of Indiana's economic growth story for those 100 years, right? So to me, it's more about building on that success and continuing to evolve. As we talked about, the world is changing at an increasingly rapid pace, even when you think about AI and just politics and just the way we all work together or not work together. And so I think my view is more building on that success and probably taking more of really thinking critically about coalitions and partnerships and how we are getting the job done from an advocacy perspective and using Indiana Prosperity 2035 as that basis.
I've gotten to know you a little bit since you've been in Indiana, and you're always high energy. What do you do to keep that high energy going? You have any secrets you can share with me? Because I could use some of that high energy.
I think some of it is just my personality, I guess, but I do enjoy Orange Theory. I have talked about that. I go to the Orange Theory exercise gym in Broad Ripple. And to me, I think whatever is your thing, right? Like you got to have something that recharges you and kind of is your own space. And for me, that's that. And also, look, my family, my kids, thinking about, I get a lot of energy from being with people and trying to make a difference and solve a problem and move whatever organization or thing I'm working on forward. And I just want to get the job done.
Yeah, maybe I should think about giving up a little of the bourbon and doing exercise. That might be a good idea for me. Vanessa, we've made it to what we call off the record speed round, where I ask you some questions and you try to give me quick answers, and we'll see how we do. So you ready? Your favorite movie?
The Cutting Edge.
Favorite place to vacation?
Steamboat. Skiing.
Favorite musical artist?
Garth Brooks.
What's the first thing you do in the morning?
Go to Orange Theory.
Title of the last book you read?
The Anxious Generation.
Is that Jonathan Haidt?
I think so. It's about rewiring of America's youth.
What food can you not live without?
Peanut butter.
Favorite sport to watch and favorite sport to participate in?
I love watching The Fever. And I don't know that there's one sport. Exercise. Orange Theory.
Best advice you ever received?
Mentorship. Make sure you have mentors.
And advice for a young person who wants to be in your shoes one day, wants to be a leader?
Your first job is not your last job.
Very good. Well, Vanessa, thank you so much for being on the Indiana 250 Off the Record podcast. I look forward to seeing how the chamber evolves and grows under your leadership. And thanks for all you're doing to help grow Indiana's economy. Thanks to Vanessa Green Sinders, President and CEO of the Indiana Chamber of Commerce, for our conversation today. To learn more about other leaders on IBJ Media's Indiana 250 list, go to indiana250.com and look for a Page 2 feature each week in IBJ. We'll be back with a new Indiana 250 Off the Record conversation soon.